This 2021 Ford Mustang Mach E has been in my driveway for a complete year, and what a year it has been. But it's time to say goodbye to this model because it's going away next week. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what I like about the Mach E, what I don't like about the Mach E, why this is a good EV for you, and why you might want to consider something else. As always, the big disclaimer in this video is that I actually own this Mach E. This is not a long-term loaner provided by Ford, which is why it does not have Mach E wheels on it. This has wheels off of a Lincoln MKZ because I wanted wider tires on it. Calling this a Mustang was certainly controversial at the beginning, but it's hard to argue with the relative sales success. This is likely going to be the best-selling Mustang of any description in the US next year, and Ford is selling so many Mach E's that they've actually decided to build even more of them and delay other EV products so they can build more Mustang Mach E's. And I think a lot of that has to do with the look. This is a very attractive vehicle. From some angles, it does sort of look like a real Mustang got stung by a bee, but I actually like the long hood profile and the sort of rounded front end. I think it's a caricature of a Mustang in some ways, but definitely an attractive caricature at that. As a refresher, for those that aren't familiar with the Mach E, this is about the same size on the outside as a Ford Edge, but you can see that the profile is very different. It's a lot less boxy, a lot less upright for aerodynamic reasons. That's also why we find the very swooping style lines around the vehicle and a greenhouse that tucks in a bit here towards the rear. This does compromise cargo capacity versus some of those more boxy options, but we do have that long hood profile up front, which gives us a front trunk that is bigger than the one that we find in some Teslas. Now, a lot of EV shoppers are really interested in the front trunk. In this vehicle, mine I should say, it is opened by a double click of the hood release, but if you get a 2021 model year vehicle, it can be released electronically. One of my complaints about the Mach E, and I'll talk about this in a little bit greater detail later, is that people that bought a 2021 model year vehicle seem to be a little bit orphaned. Software updates have not happened as rapidly as we would like, and there are some features that could be software updated on this that are on the 2022 that we don't find on this model. Front trunks are honestly a little bit controversial. They are not overall package efficient. This has a really long hood profile, very much like a regular Mustang, and if you remove this, you could probably squeeze a 5-liter V8 under here if you wanted to. But we do have a practical storage area that is separate from the cabin and separate from the storage area in the back. So if you wanted to put wet items or dirty items in there, that's where you can put them. There's a drain plug in the bottom. It's easily washed out. You can also use it as a cooler. That is very practical for some folks, but when it comes to actual cargo capacity, you could put more stuff in the back if this had been the same length vehicle, the front end had been shorter, and the back had been longer. To be honest, I consider myself frunk agnostic, but one interesting twist is that a lot of EV shoppers think that if a car does not have a front trunk, then it was a bad design based on some sort of existing ICE platform. Nothing could be further from the truth, because it's interesting to me that this style is more like an ICE platform vehicle, and in an electric car, there is no need to style your car like this with the long hood unless you want a front trunk under there. So it is perfectly rational to have a very short and stubby, very low slung hood like we find in the Mercedes-Benz EQS with no front trunk and storage in the back. It's just a personal preference. Over the 12 months and 10,000 miles that I've had this Mach E, I have gotten used to and actually started to really love these door handles. I like the fact that the door electrically pops out for you, and the button, not a problem at all. I also kind of like this really slim door handle here. Why have a power folding door handle or something like that when you could just have this really slim little nub? Now on the back door, I have a slightly different take. The button, again, no problem with that, but this grabbing the door thing to open it, I'm still not a fan of. After a year with this vehicle and not too many people that have gotten in and out of the back seat versus me as a driver right here in the front, this handle doesn't show any visible scratches on it, no scratches right up there. But back here on the door area, we do have some very fine scratches right around here, which were because people have to grab the door. You can see right now I'm grabbing it with the paint. Some people grab it like this. Some people simply pull it like this. A lot of folks will then pull it back and forth like that. That does end up with scratches on the paint. Now, the one thing that we don't find in any competitive EV out there right now is this number lock keypad on the door. This has not aged as well as I would like. It does have a few fine scratches due to this black plastic piece there, but I am perfectly willing to accept that because I love the keypad functionality on the door. I love being able to take my phone with me or not have my phone at all, enter your code here, drive the vehicle off. It also means that if you valet park your Mach E, which I have done several times without thinking about bringing its key, you have a solution for that. You can generate a code with the infotainment system. They can enter the car with the keypad. They can start the car with the code on the screen. They don't need to have a credit card key. They don't need to have any key at all. and they don't need to have a phone app or anything like that. You can just do it with the key code. That's really handy. Tires, tires, tires. Let's be frank, the base Mach E is drastically undertired for the size of the vehicle and the weight of the vehicle that it is. 225 with all-season tires in the base model are just too skinny in my opinion. It affects the handling ability, it affects the stopping distance of the Mach E. And their high inflation pressure also affects the ride quality, but that's more common with other EVs. And that is exactly why I have these wheels and these tires on this model. These are 245 with summer tires. They're Pirelli P0 tires. This is essentially the same tire blend that we find on the Mach E GT, but with a slightly thicker sidewall. The Mach E GT, I think, has an acceptable level of grip. I wish it were a little bit higher, but I think that all Mach Es should be equipped with wider tires right from the factory. I'm willing to give up a little bit of range for that. In my range test, these tires versus the stock tires only dropped my economy by about 10 miles of range. So about 260 in this model versus 270 when it was originally launched. For 2022, Ford does have a summer tire option from the factory for the Mach E. If I were shopping for one, I would at least step up to that. If not, just go ahead and upgrade to bigger wheels with bigger tires. The most frequent question I get on the Mach E is range and range loss. Let's talk about that. One slight correction to what I said before. With these tires, my range dropped down to 265 miles of range in my real-world range test. And that's because this 270-mile rated vehicle got 275 in that range test. And for 2022 and later with a software update on this model, there's going to be a little bit of additional capacity unlocked. An identical configuration for 2022 is now EPA rated for 277 miles rather than 270 miles. Now, the important reason that Ford was able to unlock more capacity is because they have a lot of this battery capacity walled off from you as the user. In this model, 88 kilowatt hours of the battery pack is available to you. It's a nearly 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. This is a big battery. This is about the same size battery pack as we find on a Tesla Model S or a Tesla Model X. In the form factor, more close to a Model 3 or a Model Y. Now, the Mach E is not as efficient as a Model Y or a Model 3, or the new EV6 or the new Hyundai Ioniq 5. But this does have a big battery, and that largely compensates for it. But because Ford does not let you use the entire battery, they've reserved that for battery lifetime, essentially. This has had a very minor range loss, much more minor than we've seen in Tesla Model 3s or Tesla Model Ys after just 1 year of ownership. In my range test, exactly the same conditions as I could get to the last time I tested when these tires were brand new. Again, I got 265 miles with these summer tires in the vehicle. In my recent range test, I won't bore you with all the footage there, I ended up with 264 miles of range. Honestly, that is within the margin of error for that particular test. And even if it were right there and that were totally accurate, we're talking way less than 1% range loss. That's really impressive, but again, it's understandable because 10 kilowatt hours of this battery is completely walled off. It is not actually possible for this battery to ever be charged 100%. And that is what helps preserve the lifetime of a battery. It's also actively heated and actively cooled. But as always with any electric vehicle, do not depend on this being able to give you 270 miles of range in all conditions. Right now out here, it's about 50 degrees. The heater is on in the cabin, and this does not have a heat pump like we do find available in the new Hyundai and Kia EVs that are out for this year, and of course the all-important Tesla Model Y. That means that in cold weather, this is going to lose range faster than anything else out there with the heat pump, and you will certainly notice that. Recently, I drove to the Kia EV6 launch event. That video is already out on the channel, and that's about 150 miles from home or so. It used almost the entire battery on that journey because it was 30 degrees at night, and the heater was heating the cabin. So by the time I got home, it had about 20% of battery left, 80% of battery for only 145, 148 miles of actual journey. That is definitely a significant loss in colder weather. Range is, of course, also affected by speed, and since I knew I was able to get from one side of my journey to the other side without DC fast charging, it was perfectly fine for me to go a little bit faster than I would if I were trying to really extend that battery out. Now let's talk about charging. The charge ports on the driver's side front fender, I like this position more than EVs that I've tested recently that have the charge connector in the back. Ford chose to put the charge electronics here because that's where they located the components for that system. Other car companies have slightly different logic. In the Hyundai and Kia EVs, the main reason that it's in the back, according to them, is because the 400 volt to 800 volt DC-DC converter is integrated into the rear motor module, and therefore less cabling was required to have that DC charge connector right back there in the rear. If I were to choose, I would rather have it up front. But after a year of DC fast charging this on a relatively regular basis, because this is the vehicle that I've been taking on longer road trips, I have to say the DC fast charge speed is one thing that Ford could really improve upon. They have tweaked it a little bit for 2022, so the charge curve is a little bit different, especially after 80%. In this vehicle, when the battery hits 80%, the charge curve just falls off a cliff, and you might as well unplug and connect to level 2 AC. If you're on a longer journey where you really need to get the battery to 90% or to 100% to make it to that next DC fast charge station, it's going to take considerably less time in some of the newer crop of EVs that are out there. Some of that also has to do with relative efficiency. Remember that if the EV is more efficient, it doesn't take as many electrons to get you that mileage, and therefore it doesn't take you as long of a charging session to get you to that next charging stop. This one tops out at around 150 kW, so about 100 kilowatts slower than we find in a Porsche Taycan, which is not a competitor to this, but also about 100 kilowatts slower than the peak rate that we find in the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6. Obviously, direct competitors to this. What does that mean in real-world terms? Well, it means that when you stop at a DC fast charge station, as long as it supports the faster charging rates, it would take about half the time in a Kia EV6 to go from 10% to 80% as it does in this to go from 10% to 80%. I continue to find front seat comfort excellent, although I do wish the seat bottom cushion adjusted for tilt, and I could wish for a four-way lumbar support, but I have to say that this lumbar support is in exactly the right place for me. We have a tilt-telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and a 3-position memory over there on the door. One of the things you'll really notice about some new EVs out there is that the Mustang Mach E's cabin is pretty large and pretty wide. It also feels roomy and spacious because of the design. Versus the Kia EV6, you'll immediately notice that headroom is greater in here, and the distance between my head and the side of the car right here is also greater. That's because some of the really aerodynamic EVs that we're starting to see out there that are very efficient, they get the better aerodynamics by really cutting the cabin in here. They push it in, making that sectional profile lower, lower coefficient of drag, lower drag itself, etc. I also really like the interior design, with one exception, the no factory shade over this large panoramic glass. I just decided to get an aftermarket one. It works just fine. It's not too big of a deal. Kind of wish one had been included from the factory. You can really see the more normal proportions and more normal design in here versus the average crossover. Again, nothing pinched in, so lots of headroom there and lots of room beside your head. Height adjustable shoulder belts there, 4-way adjustable ratchet style front headrests. The front seats, again, are pretty comfortable. I also find the design very attractive, and there's lots of soft touch materials in this cabin. I really appreciate that Ford decided to go with fabric inserts on the dashboard, the soft touch stitched materials, etc. We do have some harder plastics up top of the dashboard, but they're really quite far away from reach. We also have this very large touchscreen infotainment system. It could be a little bit snappier. Some of the response time is a little bit laggy, just the amount of time it takes for some of these pop-ups to actually pop up and do their thing. But I like the size and I like the format. One odd thing with the software is that I still don't have the option to do the portrait mode CarPlay. That has not been over-the-air updatable just yet. Now, Ford says that the entire vehicle is over-the-air updatable, not just this infotainment system, and that does make this different than other EVs, where really only the infotainment and control systems are over-the-air updatable. I also love the fact that Ford gives us an LCD instrument cluster over here that's a pretty decent size. I don't really need a larger one, but I do find this more attractive and easier to see than the really small one that we find in the ID4. Now, this little module here constantly reminds me that I have a vehicle capable of Blue Cruise, but that I don't have Blue Cruise on my model. Again, more about that in just a little bit. Steering wheel has been very comfortable and I think very well designed, and I love all the storage in the center console. This is something that Ford has done an excellent job at that not all EVs really do well on. This is a multi-tiered storage compartment. So there's an area under there, there's an area above, 2 big cup holders there, a shelf here where we find the rotary shifter, electronic parking brake, and then a lot of storage right here in the center console as well. I find myself storing all sorts of stuff right in there. We then have that fold up and down armrest on top. Speaking of the rear seat, there's tons of room back here. Even though versus something like an Escape or an Edge, the ceiling does come in a little bit this way, which does reduce the amount of distance between my head and that side. This certainly feels wider and roomier than something like that new EV6. You'll certainly notice that in the middle seat position here, where this bench is nice and wide, very easy to put child seats back here, especially because this has a ton of legroom, over 81 inches of combined legroom, front row plus second row, so rear-facing child seats in the Mach E, absolutely no problem. Two big air vents right there in the middle, fold-down center armrest right there. As a rear seat passenger, really the only thing I could ask for would be reclining rear seats, but we don't find that in too many options. Another nice touch is an unexpected level of quality when it comes to the rear doors back here. We have the same soft touch materials in the upper and mid section of the doors as we saw up front. Same sort of soft touch armrests and fabric on the speaker grills as well. For cargo practicality, I would have preferred a rear window that wasn't quite as raked, but this still has a large and accommodating cargo area in the back. It's pretty easy to line up 24-inch roller bags across the rear, which I have done on several occasions. And under the load floor, there is a ton of extra storage space. You can see this is where I keep a spare camera, because you never know when you might need that. We've got tons of charge cords and adapters and things like that under here. Another nice touch, this is not the EVSE that comes with the Ford, but the Ford does come with a dual voltage EVSE. You can connect it to a 30 amp 240 volt circuit with this connector, or you can connect it to a regular 15 amp household outlet. So you do have that option right from the factory, and unless you need to charge faster overnight, you don't really need to buy another home EVSE. Over here in the corner, you can see a plastic tab that helps keep the load floor in this up position when you're rooting around underneath, and you can also drop the load floor down to below that if you want even more cargo room, but then the cargo area is not going to be level with the hatch. My only major complaint back here is this flimsy cargo cover that Ford gives us. These plastic modules seem to snap off on a regular occasion, and it's just not the most convenient to use. It's supposed to snap up here in those hooks and then tie back to that area. Theoretically, this will then move out of the way when you open the cargo, right like that, and then sort of duck down a little bit when the trunk lid is closed. I would have preferred a more traditional roller style cargo cover. On the software update front, Ford has been simultaneously more adventurous than other mainstream car companies and less adventurous than, of course, the elephant in the room, Tesla. This does have the ability to be over-the-air updated, and according to Ford, that is almost the entire vehicle. They haven't said if there's anything really excluded from the over-the-air update ability of this vehicle. Drivetrain control software, charging control software, the infotainment system, the instrument cluster, everything, all of that is over-the-air updatable. But for some reason, a lot of the early updates could not be over-the-air updated. You had to go to a dealer to have them installed. Now, they did come to everybody later if you were patient enough, but why would you be patient when that software update is just staring at you right in the face? So I had to go to a dealer to have this updated. That is a bummer. The other bummer, no Blue Cruise still on this 2021 model year vehicle, even though it had been promised for months and months and months. No update seemingly on the horizon for this car for some reason, which is part of why I ended up keeping this for a full calendar year. It was promised to be in June, which was more than 6 months ago, and now who knows when it will happen. What's particularly vexing about that is that according to Ford, the hardware is all the same as a 2022 model year Ford Mustang Mach E, and those have Blue Cruise right on it from the factory. But this one is still orphaned, just like all the other early adopters out there. And that early adopter being orphaned thing, I do have a bit of a problem with that for the Mach E. That's something that Ford could really remedy very easily, but I don't understand why they haven't done that. Is it that they want to keep this feature exclusive to the Mach E GT for a bit? That was the first vehicle that launched with it. Is it that there's something else that we don't know going on under the skin that has to be tweaked? No one is really quite sure. All I know is that that is not available on this model. Also not available on this model is the update to improve DC fast charging above 80%. I still don't have that update on mine. On the other hand, Ford has done an exceptional job and continues to do an exceptional job with the infotainment software in the car. I love the fact that this is very fully featured. There are a ton of options. The way you can configure this car is absolutely insane with the number of options and settings that are available there. We have drive mode settings, that sort of thing there. We also have a decent amount of detail about our trip computer, where the consumption has gone. You can see that this trip computer I set 9,000 747 miles ago. 9% of the climate has been, 9% of the battery, I should say, has been used by the climate, 85% by the route, 3% external temperature and accessories. So that tells you where the energy has gone. And we have a decent number of options with this system. There are also a few games built in there. But the party trick for most folks really is going to be the factory nav interface. Let me go back to that here. I find myself using this more often than other factory navs for one good reason. Let's, for instance, say we want to go to Los Angeles. We'll just go right there to Los Angeles, 297 miles away. Actually 352 once we've actually routed there, obviously. Hit the go button and you'll see the party trick here. The car knows I don't have enough battery to go there. Go ahead and add those EV charging stations for me. This is something that Hyundai and Kia in their systems will not do. Does not add DC fast charge stations at all. And Volkswagen does very badly in the ID4. This one, 2 chargers. Sometimes it's a little bit pessimistic. It'll show the route there. You can see right there, and it shows the DC charging stations that it has assigned for you. If we go back and we look at the route details or trip overview right there, see this charge, hit the details button, it will tell you it wants you to go to this Electrify America, that Electrify America. Spend 30 minutes there, 35 minutes there, go to 62%, here go to 57%. This is very Tesla-like. And it directs you to charging stations that it knows are fast enough to charge this at the maximum speed, and it knows that they work well with the vehicle. This is something that Ford has been working on a lot lately. Ford uses an internet-connected system, and they aggregate data from folks out there that have had charging issues. So if your Mach E has had an issue charging at a particular station, this system is going to be less likely to recommend that charge station to other people in the future. And it has been noticeable. If I follow their recommendations for particular charging stops, I have not had any DC fast charging errors in about the last 6 months or so. The data has definitely been getting better. Now, sometimes on personal choices, maybe I would choose to say at this place right here, charge for longer than the 30 minutes and go beyond 62%, and then maybe I wouldn't need to stop at this station to go all the way. But Ford has made this the shortest option possible. They know that going beyond 80% would take you too long, but if you did want to stop there and hang out for dinner and you could go to 100%, then you could skip this charging stop. Bottom line, I am very impressed with the Ford Mustang Mach E. Ford did an incredible job of making this an honest-to-goodness Tesla competitor. There's a reason that Teslas sell well. The experience on the inside, the charging experience, etc., is very well polished. And if we're looking for the next level of polish, I would argue that it is currently the Mustang Mach E, especially with a lot of the software changes that Ford has been making consistently with the connected navigation system. That is really important for anybody out there that wants to just plug in a destination, know that they can get there without worrying about anything. And a lot of other EVs, even brand new EVs that I have driven this week that aren't even on sale in the United States, it's up to you and an Electrify America app or your own personal decision about where to DC fast charge. Or if you're driving a Volkswagen ID4 and you follow the instructions, you could end up taking a day longer to get somewhere because it will literally tell you to stop for 8 or 9 or 10 hours at an AC level 2 station. Although there are certainly a few things about the Mach E that I would change. I would love it if this model got the adaptive suspension system that we find available in the GT, because ride quality is not exactly my cup of tea. I wish that the driver's seat had an adjustable seat bottom cushion. There are a few other tweaks here and there, but honestly, that is a very short and not terribly consequential list. This is an absolutely incredible EV, and this is one of the first medium to long-term vehicles that I've had here at Alex and Autos that I'm actually sad to see go. And I think that regardless of what I replace this with, be sure and stay tuned for that, I am not sure whether it would be as good of an EV as this Mustang Mach E right here. But again, I buy these vehicles for reviews to find out how they are long-term to live with. So it's time for this to move on and for someone else to be able to enjoy, quite simply, one of the best electric cars on sale in America today. Before I close, I should say, though, that the Mach E, because of its sales success and the fact that it honestly is so good, has started getting considerably more expensive. The base model is now $1,000 more than it was at the beginning. And this vehicle, at the time that I bought it, it had some cash on the hood in form of incentives, there was a rebate, etc. So to buy this model today would cost me about $4,000 more than I paid for this model last year, assuming you could even get a dealer to sell it to you for MSRP. Ford hopes to be able to change that next year because they're seriously ramping up production of the Mach E. They're targeting 200,000 units of this EV by 2023, and it's going to be a ramp-up format. This last year they built about 60,000 units. Next year they're going to build probably over 100,000 units. I should say this year in 2022, over 100,000 units. And then next year in 2023, by the end, they'll be able to make 200,000 of these a year. Plus, of course, the upcoming F-150 Lightning. And in case you're wondering, yes, the F-150 Lightning is probably what is going to replace this, depending on exactly when it comes out. I'll see all of you later.